Yeah, I'll kick it back in, and then I think we'll take what we just spoke about and put it at the end because it's pretty candid. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Stuff.
So, hello and welcome back to the InterDrone Podcast, your 30,000-foot view of the commercial drone industry. It is Tuesday, January 26th, 2021. My name is CJ Smith, joined today with Mike Peel, Chairman of InterDrone, and our special guest today, Kenji Sugahara. He is the CEO and President of the Drone Service Providers Alliance. We were just talking before we started recording that he has really been in kind of the remote ID ecosystem, or kind of in that frame of thinking for a long time, since it began. And we thought it was extremely timely to get him on the podcast not too long after the remote ID ruling. And we've talked about that a little bit the last couple of episodes, but there's a decent amount to unpack there. And Kenji is definitely the guy to have on and help us do that. So Kenji, thanks again for being here today. For anybody who maybe isn't familiar with some of the work you do in drones, can you just provide maybe a brief overview about your background and then some of the work that you do in the space?
Sure. So I'm an attorney by trade. I don't practice. I'm involved in the policy side, and I'm also a drone pilot. So I actually fly for a living. That's my main source of income. So I do a lot of car commercials, the national ones, and then Netflix movies, Hulu, you name it. That's sort of my shtick. I originally got into drones. When I was running the Oregon Bicycle Racing Association, which is a sanctioning organization in Oregon, Southwest Washington, and Northern California for bike races. And I figured, what better way to capture bike races and show it off to everybody else but by drone. So I got into it that way. And then eventually people started saying, hey, this is really cool. Maybe you should start getting into the commercial side. So I'm like, okay. And then a few years back, once 107, 333 days were around, I said, you know what, I'm going to go full-time drones. So I did that. One thing that happened when I was sort of in that space was there was starting to be some legislation being passed by the Oregon legislature. And I figured might as well get involved in that side because I'm the type of guy who thinks, I might as well get my input into how the policies and regulations are made, because I sure don't want to be on the receiving end of everything. So that's how I sort of got into the policy work. And then subsequent to that, I start to realize there is a need for sort of remote identification or a digital license plate for drones. And just serendipitously, just by happen chance, I was in Washington, D.C. I had my idea about remote ID, and I took it to sort of an AUVSI expo where there was talk about an RFI for remote ID, and I submitted my white paper. And then I was asked to participate in the 2017 FAA Aviation Rulemaking Committee on Remote ID. So got into that. And then eventually through that, after the art concluded, I put ASTM and sort of the Gabe Cox together, who's from Intel, and found a home for remote ID. And that's how that got started. And I've been involved in the ASTM process since then.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit more about some of the work that you are doing in standards and how you think that this will kind of progress the industry and create something a little more sustainable and scalable.
Sure. So standards are really important in the industry because otherwise, if you don't have standardization, you end up with fragmentation. So, for example, you might end up having different types of equipment needs, different types of apps for each different implementation. And that standardization just makes it a lot easier for everybody to look at, say, hey, this is what you need to work towards and create your apps and your hardware for. So that's sort of why standards are important. And then it's like a common dictionary. Just say you use that dictionary to sort of create your product. And that's sort of what we do in the standards world. The standards in remote ID were pretty interesting in the process. It might bore you to death, but the way to look at it is when we started the process, the NPRM was there. And then we also had we had the information from the Aviation Rulemaking Committee. They had a report. And the way it works is the FAA could not provide us feedback on the standard. So we had no idea sort of what direction they were heading. But the FAA had a representative on our ASTM standards group. So they took what we were developing in the standard and taking it back to the FAA. So it was a one-way street. There's some ex parte rules, which means that in essence, they can't communicate because they're in the middle of rulemaking. So we can't get any special advance notice or anything like that. No special treatment. But because that information was flowing from the standards group to the FAA, what ended up in the rule was very similar to what we had on the broadcast side. The big thing, of course, in the final rule was network was gone, which was huge. It was a big shock to all of us. But since we had most of the guts there, what's nice is for the standard that we made, there's not going to need to be many changes made to our broadcast standard. There's going to be a couple fields that need to be changed, but that's about it.
So you said you were shocked by the absence of network kind of laid out. And I mean, why is it so shocking though? Because I was personally shocked, and in my perspective, I mean, that's what I was thinking of with remote ID, just because of all the scalability advantages you get with a network-based solution, even if there is some more complexity in getting it off the ground. So like, why was it a shock?
Well, the industry expected it. I mean, you look at the NPRM, it was in there. It was a pretty large piece of it, and suddenly, poof, it's gone. And I think industry-wide folks were just surprised. And I think there's a couple reasons that the FAA took this sort of course that they did. First off, big kudos or credit goes to our drone community. They actually spoke up, and 52,000 comments, over 52,000, maybe close to 53. That's huge. Yeah.
I mean, people don't comment on FAA rules at that level. No. That might have been historical, right?
I think I read something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a piece of history in terms of the feedback that was provided. Sure, there was some like form letters or whatever, but those people still commented, and there were a lot of people who put in a lot of thought and took their time and gave rational reasons. And the FAA did listen to that. The other piece too is there was some testing done, which showed that the broadcast technology was actually adequate. It's been tested out to about 2 kilometers, which exceeded our expectations. And that's not in just like in the middle of nowhere, but this is in places where there is other 2.4 gigahertz sources of electromagnetic.
So it could handle being in a noisy environment.
Yeah, exactly. So with that information, I think that put the worries from the security folks at ease, DHS, DOJ, et cetera. So I think that was helpful. And I think the third thing was that the testing of the cohort showed that the technology for network just wasn't there. And what I mean by that, sort of the inter-USS communications, the cellular connections, all the back end just wasn't ready for prime time. Even on the network side, you think about it, you get full bars, sometimes the connection still sucks. And even in low areas, of sort of cell signals, you get nothing. So I think those 3 aspects taken together is what led the FAA to say, you know what, network's not ready yet. But
I mean, look, we just had trouble live streaming. If that's any indication of network reliability, and you know, the router's right there. So, but yeah, I mean. On that point, though, the technology's not there yet. When will it be there? And I think there's even another layer of reliability, as in like, who's the single source of truth for the position of the aircraft that hadn't been really worked out in full detail either. Is that correct? Or am I just kind of taking my unsciency brain and trying to look at other people's paperwork and come up with facts?
What do you mean by single source of truth?
So if the drone is squawking on, and it's on broadcast but then we also have a network position. Which is the actual position of the drone? Are they both accurate enough?
I think using the standards work, they'll both be accurate enough. But the interesting thing is there is nothing that prevents sort of the broadcast information to getting to a network. So, for example, like secondary surveillance, you see ADS-B receivers all over the place. You even see crowdsourced like information. There's nothing that prevents that from happening with drone information, especially in like crowded urban areas where there's companies like Hidden Level that they're in the business of sort of deploying sensors around critical infrastructure, or that's their idea, so that broadcast information could be picked up, and then eventually sent out to the network if they so desire. I know that there's been tests done using DJI's Aeroscope in the UK where they received sort of their remote ID broadcast to Aeroscope, and then they got that out to sort of a UTM type of USS or unmanned service supplier. So that doesn't preclude that. Also in the rule, remember that while network is not a method of compliance for remote ID, it doesn't rule it out in the future. It says that it could be contemplated as technology improves. So you have that too.
I was thinking too, do you think, so you said the network solution maybe wasn't ready for prime time. You mentioned, I think, September of 2023. Do you think the FAAs is kind of letting the market and letting some of these private companies maybe build out some of these different network-based solutions, like a UTM system, and then maybe they'll take and look at what works and then maybe implement something themselves down the line? Is this the FAA just trying to, not put everything on their own plate, but like see what the industry comes up with and then potentially adapt something like that for a network-based solution in the future?
Yeah, and on top of that, is that putting too much emphasis on the market being able to produce the result on their own without guidance? Or do you think there's enough ramp for the inter-USS providers to?
So there's a couple things to unpack there. I just want to make sure that when we mention the 2023 date, that it's the implementation of broadcast remote ID. So that doesn't have anything to do with network. That's network. In terms of UTM, there's nothing in the rule that prevents sort of work on the UTM. There's actually incentives for that development to continue, because that can be used as a way to share intent. The 4D planning, so that's the airspace reservations. And that can still continue, and it should continue, because that'll enable a lot of BV loss operations that's critical to, say, drone delivery and those type of operations that are eventually down the road. Will the lack of a rule impact that? Probably, yeah. But that can be implemented through the BV loss sort of rules that will eventually come out, and that can help drive that. And I think they're actively working on that too. You also have guidance documents like the UTM ConOps 2.0 that was just released by the FAA, and I think that UTM ConOps 3.0 is also underway. And for those who don't understand what ConOps is, it's a concept of operations. It's an operating document that shows how certain they envision sort of operations taking place. It's a great overview. You can find it on the FAA's website. Just look up UTM ConOps 2.0 and you'll find it.
Yeah, ConOps is one of those kind of abbreviations / acronyms that when you're in drone circles, you hear come up all the time. But thank you for explaining to the audience, because not everybody is.
And UTM, there's probably some folks who tune in who don't know what UTM. It's unmanned traffic management, and what that's like, air traffic control for drones.
Well, my favorite is the UP, because that is what UTM pilot program. So that's an embedded acronym.
Yeah.
Which has an embedded acronym, because UAS.
Yeah, which reminds me, what's interesting, I'm also involved on a bunch of drone advisory committee task groups. Oh, by the way, I'm also a member of the FAA drone advisory committee, the newest one. But that's the one bugaboo that I've been having in meetings. I'm like, guys, gals, there's a lot of acronyms, and if we publish this, people are going to be like, what?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important that any document that comes out from a group like that is easy to understand, is in plain English, because otherwise it's like the normal person off the street's going to be like, what the?
Well, and we're facing a different type of technology, right? Because fundamentally, commercial aircraft, or even small piloted aircraft, like the type of person that's interested in that, and the requirements of that person to even engage in those markets, or to privately fly, like it's a lot of commitment. And so, like, you'd want them to have a certain level of like technical kind of knowledge about what's going on, whereas like for drones, you really it's a broader market of people that are going to be engaging with them. Part of the appeal of the technology is the ease of use, right? So you need to be able to communicate to somebody who isn't embedded in that culture the same way.
Yep.
What the actual things they need to know are for their own safety, for them engaging safely in the airspace with others. And it's just, we all got to get away from the acronyms as much as possible. All right. That's my stump speech.
One rant for the
plain English, make it accessible.
Plain English. Yeah. Even, it's better to have a long, verbose, explained thing than it is to, consolidate so it sounds cool, like UPP up,
UPP, IPP, ISB, it's like.
Oh, and then the shame that comes with getting it wrong on one of our calls. One of our staff confused UPP and IPP, and when Andy Thurling corrected her, I just felt like, oh my God, I felt bad, because you don't want to get it wrong. You want to feel like you're a part of the conversation because you've earned a place to be there talking about drones, right? That's the other thing. But
it's okay to get things wrong. I've done that before. You just fess up and you say, I was wrong, and this is what's correct.
Right.
That's all right.
Well, it's an emerging industry. I'm sure we've all been wrong at least once so far.
Yeah, and
I'm wrong every day.
So many concepts and all that stuff floating through my head. Sometimes it gets confused, so that's okay.
Kenji, can you talk to us more about the DAC for anybody that doesn't know? So the Drone Advisory Committee, organized by the FAA. You talk about how long the DAC has been in existence, how long you've been working with them, and then what's kind of top of mind for the organization. Like, how does it all work?
When did it start? I have no idea. I think it's like 2016, 17. Yeah. I know that Brendan from DJI has been one of the original folks on it for a long time. And I think Intel was on it for a long time. But the Drone Advisory Committee is a committee that was put together, an official committee that was put together by the FAA to help provide advice on issues that come up. So the FAA actually tasks the Drone Advisory Committee to research and look at topics and then provide feedback to the FAA. So it's not a group that can on its own just come up, oh, we want to address this or that. Right. It's actually has certain tasks that it tasks the group with to take a look at, and it's a very diverse group in terms of many different interests. For example, you have state and local interests, you have manned aviation interests, you have now for the first time drone service providers. So. Right. And it's a consensus-based group, and it's great because you hear a lot of different perspectives, which I think is important for all of us in the community. Because sometimes you hear in groups like, "Oh yeah, that's nothing to the helicopter; it just went through whatever." No, there's some real serious things that need to be discussed in terms of air safety, and also public safety too. So. It's a great cross section that provides information to the FAA from a diverse sort of perspective.
Do you feel like just the knowledge base and also the culture of that group has evolved significantly in the last 2 years? And also just like now that you kind of got the insider's perspective, what do you think the basic culture or perspective of the DAC is as a whole on where the industry's at? Like, is it antagonistic? Are people frustrated? Are they optimistic?
Well, just to be upfront, we haven't had our first meeting. So,
okay.
But I've been involved in the task groups for a number of years now. Which is a great way to get involved, is to get involved, do the work, provide information. But there's a strong sort of sense of professionalism in terms of, we know we all have to work together. There are points where we might disagree with each other, which is okay. But there's also places where we can find a lot of things in common. I mean, it's just providing that sort of understanding and perspective that each other has. Some of the GA unmanned man pilots might disagree with us on some things, but again, there's this sort of common thread that we want to ensure that we don't want drones going through the windshield of a Cessna or something like that. That's right. Obvious. So. But in terms of the way that the feeling of the industry, I think there's a sense that it's still UAS is still a very young industry. If you think about it, we've only been in existence for a small number of years compared to, say, aviation in general, which is approaching like 100 years.
100 years, yeah.
So there's still a lot of potential, and there are some. Still some hurdles and things that need to be clarified, especially in terms of the rule sphere, with a lot of evolution going on. But the world's our oyster. There was a lot of sort of money being dumped into UAS because it was a shiny new thing, just like flying cars is right now. And I wouldn't call it flying cars. I'd say the Elon Musk type rocketry, space exploration is a new shiny thing. But yeah, so you're seeing a little bit of shakeout. You're slowly starting to see some maturation, but at the same time, we're still very early in the process.
I'll say with the shakeout though has come with like less momentum and then also less scale, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes dumb money is good in that it brings attention to things and then motivation for other players in adjacent industries to kind of create space. So I'm hoping that in the next, I would give it more time actually than I think most people out there, who want to pitch it completely optimistically. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see such a steady buildup. It's going to be the type of thing where, in 2024, you turn around and like, whoa, wow, that really exploded on us because we stopped like headline grabbing like we were 2 to 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, this is where the exciting stuff happens here in this period.
It's where the rubber meets the road, and you really start to see cool products coming out. And I think that the rulemaking with ops over people and remote ID was the cornerstone of a lot of advancement you're going to see, because without remote ID, I don't think we're not going to get anywhere. And that's sort of the key that unlocks everything.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, people think regulation, it could be slowing things down, but in a lot of situations, regulation provides clarity. It provides kind of the necessary understanding of what you can and can't do. And then people can start doing their jobs with drones and running their businesses.
Yeah. I would say, on that point, my perspective is that for small businesses, it's always good to have no regulation because, all right, well, that's less to be concerned about. But like, if you're a large business investing, you want to know what you can do. Yeah. And without that, you're not going to put more money past the experimental phase. You need to know the actual limits of what your operations can be.
Yeah. And what it also does is there's some tangential things too, like insurance is the big one. Insurance is what drives every single thing. And now that we have rules, as long as you comply with the rules, guess what? It's insurance will cover you. You fly outside the rules, guess what? Insurance isn't going to cover you. Right. So I think insurance is one of the primary drivers of compliance too.
Yeah. It's always about money, right?
Yep, exactly.
Kenji, you mentioned there are finally some drone service providers making their way onto the deck. Can you talk about the Drone Service Providers Alliance? You're, I know, one of the founders, I believe the CEO, if I'm not mistaken, but we just had Vic on last week and we spoke a little bit about it, but talk to us about the DSP Alliance and kind of the goals.
It was funny because Vic sort of became free late last year, and I'm like, Vic, do you want to do something, like do stuff that we already do. And put together an organization which is a little bit more organized? It's going to have a little bit more, it's going to have more credibility. And it took him a bit to get on board, and then finally he's like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And now it's like, now because like full guns.
Now you can't stop him. Yeah, I know the personality. Yeah.
Yeah. He is unstoppable. I go on social media and he's posting all the time. I'm sitting there like, Vic, how do you find time to do this? I can't do that. But yeah, it's the Drone Service Providers Alliance is really there to represent sort of small, medium-sized businesses, and that's important because, like for example, on the DAC, the big businesses have been represented, and there are a lot of companies that have sort of vaporware products, so to speak, like a lot of money, but nothing. Implementation really hasn't started yet. Hold on one second. I'm gonna put you on mute. I got a cough.
No problem.
To his point there, the vaporware kind of stuff, like they had influence because they had money, but also tech was so explosive for years that I don't think people realized how brain dead so many of these things were, because we were kind of meeting a lot of promises on tech.
Yeah.
And it's not the same environment even in broader technology anymore. Like it takes a lot to wow people and trick them. I think we've learned some of the things as a culture, but go on. So you're saying.
Yeah. But if you think about it, in the drone industry, what makes up the majority of operations in the US today in terms of commercial work? It's the small and medium-sized businesses that are out there, either filming, doing inspections, checking out. I think inspections are absolutely huge. I know a bunch of my friends like James Pittman and those guys, and Daniel Herbert and those guys, they're all in the inspection business and they're going gangbusters. And so are the folks in the film and television industry. And there's other types of like inspection, like crop inspection, all that stuff. But that does, I'm going to go on aside with the crop inspection stuff. It's really interesting because the farmers are very, very slow to move to adopt technology. So it's back like 4 or 5 years ago when I'm like, oh, this might be cool to get into that stuff. Farmers always still love to feel the earth, go out there, smell. And I think they're finally starting to get into sort of using drone technology. But
also their budgets are tighter than I think people understand, and they need to be able to prove that crop yield. There's a lot of factors that made agriculture more complex than I think those initial reports it would have indicated. Yep. But the cool thing though was all the other industries that kind of nobody was looking at that just cropped up out of nowhere, on the inspection side, like you said.
Yeah. But to get back to the DSP, I mean, it's that representation that we can help provide a voice. And it's not only to the FAA, but also provide educational opportunities for whenever there's legislation at the federal state level. One of the things that we're monitoring is, for example, there's a bill in New Mexico that brings up aerial trespass. We're like, and the way it's written, it's probably gonna be preempted because it could include flights that are in clearly navigable airspace. So there's stuff like that. We're paying attention to Mississippi, where there's some legislation which sort of says that there's a property right in the airspace. That's probably going to be a problem. but there's also good legislation. There's a bill in New York that specifically calls out UAS, and I'm wondering if Andy has a sort of a hand in that.
I would bet.
Yeah, but it's a very positive bill, and it's gives us opportunity to speak positively about drones too. So whether it be providing written testimony or other information, it's a great way to involve ourselves more in the process, and also encourage people to get involved. Because I think that's the most impactful thing we can do as an industry is provide resources to people to get involved at the local level, because there's nothing like a drone pilot going into a city council meeting and saying, hey, I make my living this way. This is the impact that this sort of what you're thinking about passing could impact me. Mm-hmm. And it's those personal stories, I think, that people, the folks who make the laws and policies listen to and can relate to, especially when you're talking about putting food on your table and all that stuff.
It's really important to tie a face to things in any kind of effort like that. And, for so long, I'm really happy that you guys did this together. I think organizing it makes a difference. And now we can point to the logo and say, those are those people, and now we have the podcast where you guys can show your face behind it. So it's not just, a partnership or an alliance on paper, and that makes the difference too.
And what I think where we've succeeded is we've actually had a proven track record, and we've been involved in the process. We know how it works. We know the people who are critical to it, and we're working with the right people too. For example, Dave Messina from the FPV Freedom Coalition is on our board. Sharon from Women on Drones is on our board now, and then we're going to be bringing on some very, very well-known individuals in the industry very soon too. So you'll be able to look forward to hearing about that too.
I just also want to go back to what you were saying before about basically the DSPs having a voice and the majority of operations actually being those types of operations. Other than money, I mean, was there any other reason for that kind of culture split? Because one of the things that I've always talked about is like, one of the things that's interesting with or with the drone industry that tends to happen is we don't talk about how awesome it is that of the things that we're already doing, because we're talking about the grandiose visions. What do you think was, other than money, was contributing factors to that?
I think it's a very fragmented industry in terms of there's so many different types of applications with different concerns and all that. So you have that, and then plus you have the small, medium-sized business. Often we're busy. There's a lot of different concerns that it's like the policy side is really the last thing on our minds. When we're out there thinking about flying, what we're doing the next day, it sort of gets lost in the ether. It's like, oh yeah, that won't affect me or whatever. But I think that's sort of why it's taken so long to coalesce. And the remote ID rule was a coalescing moment, which brought together these fragmented group in terms of what the way I like to think about it in terms of visualization is you have a picture of arrows going in all different directions. We're all trying to do our own thing, and we're doing something, but we're not all aligned. But take that picture and then you align those arrows in one single direction, and then suddenly it becomes a powerful message. And I think that's sort of what we do. And what happened around remote ID is just saying, as an industry, as sort of all of us, we don't like the direction you're going. So I think that was a watershed moment that sort of aligned, and serendipitously we stepped up at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I once told one of my previous managers who was trying to get on the ground and understand InterDrone really fast. I was like, sometimes InterDrone or the drone industry feels less like an industry and more like, a show about hammers. It's like all of these different industries are using this tool, but we're bringing them all together and saying, you like hammers, right?
Yeah.
And, that's one of the things, like you were just saying, I think you brought this point up so well, is that, regulation is kind of like the glue that kind of holds our show together, for the reason that it's the common interest that binds all the drone people together. But it's also, like you said, the thing that they want to be solved and already working so they can do their specific industry work.
Yeah.
So just kind of insider baseball take right there on what it's like to manage InterDrone and pull all these cats together.
Yeah. Getting people on the same page on a lot of things is really hard. And just getting it's a logistics piece for you too, I know. So it's like or
letting people know what they need to be concerned about, because sometimes they don't know, and that's like the safety case. Like, please come learn.
Yeah,
make us all look better.
Exactly.
Well, on that point, can you talk to us about education in the drone industry and how important that is? Like public perception, educating lawmakers, educating citizens. Is the drone industry, from your perspective, doing a good job at this, or can we all be working better to just kind of make this more of a common piece of technology in the world, and something that people are less kind of shocked by or have less fears of?
Yeah, and there's an educational component that's, I think, one of the most critical pieces. But in terms of public acceptance, I think what's going to happen is it becomes so commonplace, it stops becoming a big deal, and just getting people accustomed is one of the best things that we can do. And we can do that by sort of using best practices. I mean, if you're out flying, don't fly like within 3 feet of somebody's head. That's sort of like the things, but people still do it. So in terms of education, I think there's a couple plays that we can do it. One thing is sort of making sure that there's drone STEM education going on, because it's a great tool to teach mechanical engineering, programming, whatever, and you expose kids to it at an early age. Then they not only go into the drone industry, but they can also share it with friends. Hey, cool! Look, guys, look at these cool things that I've been doing with drones, and then they talk to their parents about, check this out. Drones do these really cool things. They're not out to spy on everybody. So there's that sort of whole education component through K through 12, which I think is an absolutely great way to sort of not only spur the industry, but just improve public acceptance. Educating the legislators is absolutely critical. A lot of them only hear complaints. If you think about it, people complain.
My constituents are concerned about privacy.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but a lot of people are very narcissistic in terms of it's all about me. This is an aside, but we got to break that idea that not everybody's out to spy on you. The drone up in the air is probably not checking you out and you're gardening. It's like you're not that interesting.
Sorry to break it to you, but
it's
not that interesting.
Yeah. But educating legislators about the positive uses and saying, hey, this is what most drones are doing. These are the positive benefits. This is the economic activity that occurs through it, and just help them sort of walk them through sort of the positive use cases of drones. And then, of course, there's the third piece is educating drone pilots with best practices. How to fly correctly, how to fly well. And it's not only the commercial side, but the recreational side, because it's like, you want people to be responsible flyers. You don't want to be making the news, because that makes our lives a lot more difficult, that are trying to sort of talk out about the drones in a positive way. You don't want stories about drones crashing into helicopters that happen. So it's it's education is the multi-component piece of the puzzle, and it's a super important piece. And you have a huge part of it too, in terms of just getting the word out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do worry that we're only talking to an insulated group, though, and we've had discussions, and I've had discussions on other podcasts besides this one about, we really need forces at, like it was nice when Intel was in the industry because of the publicity. We want to get to that level of familiarness with the general public, and I don't think we've really solved that kind of outer ring. Like the K through 12 stuff is important. That's why we're big supporters of open source. We work with Drone Code. They have this great company that's part of their ecosystem called Copter Express, and they get these little toolkits, drone kits in the hands of kids in Russia. And I know they're here in the United States now. All that stuff matters to really making that difference, because we can educate drone pilots. That's one step, but we also need to educate the people who are seeing the drones, or even those people's bosses, or their potential clients of what this technology actually is actually capable of. And yeah, it's a big job.
Yeah.
But thank you for being a part of it with us.
Yeah. And, it's engaging with the media too, and making sure that there's positive articles out there. Just having drone pilots who do stuff, just say, hey, pitch ideas to your local newspaper and stuff. Why not?
Right.
It's a neat way to show off what you do. And it's a cool way to show off the technology.
Yeah. So back to the remote ID ruling. Talk to us about what you, obviously I think we're all happy that we have some clarity now. Yeah. But can you talk to us about kind of the broadcast versus network based? What did you like about the ruling? What, if anything, maybe would you consider changing? And do you think we, most of the comments in the NPRM were essentially listened to and reflected in the final ruling?
Yeah. So do you want me to give a brief overview of the difference between broadcast and network?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. So broadcast is the signal is sent out from the drone in one direction. So it's like a signal over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth going, I'm here, with no sort of dedicated thing listening on the other end. So network is where the drone has to connect to a network, and that's was anticipated to be through a cellular network, and that would connect you with the sort of a UAS service supplier, which would sort of record your information, where you're flying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the biggest difference is broadcast. You just have a standalone saying piece of equipment, and it just sends out information. Network, you have to actually connect something. And the sort of what's interesting between network and broadcast is where there's it's sort of a cost shift, because with broadcast, you just build it into the drone and you're done. You don't need any cellular fees to pay to connect to a network or anything like that. If anybody wants to take that information, put it out to the network, then it's incumbent upon them, whether it be a city, a private company, or whatever. And with cellular, the cost then becomes onto to the drone operator. So I think that's sort of the biggest differences between broadcast and sort of network.
Yeah. I know we've had these questions come up on the podcast before, but what do you say to pilots who are, maybe a little less familiar with remote ID and broadcast based? And if they're saying, hey, I have a drone, do I need to retrofit it? What do I do to be able to fly compliantly? What do you say to pilots like that?
Yeah. So here's things. If it's under 250 grams, you don't need remote ID. So that's unless you're flying under 107. So if you think about it, if it needs to be registered with the FAA, then you need remote ID. So if you're under 250 and you're recreational, doesn't need to be registered, you don't need remote ID. Pretty easy. And then if you're over 250 grams, The way it works is in September of 2022, drones will have to have remote ID built in, like most consumer off-the-shelf drones. So your DJIs, your Autels, or whatever to be sold in the US will have to comply with remote ID. So those will be built in. And then when September 2023 rolls around, you need remote ID. And there's another way. If you have an existing drone or you have a home-built drone, you can add a module. So that's going to be probably something pretty small that you can stick on your drone. That sends out information, and you'll be compliant in that way. So those are the last way to sort of comply the remote ID rule is to fly in what's called a FRIA, which is a federally recognized area where you can fly without remote ID. It's like it can be like a AMA field. There'll be fields available that can be set up by educational institutions. So in those areas, you don't need to have a module or comply with remote ID.
Right.
So it sounds, because we've heard concerns about either cost impact or weight impact, which then becomes battery impact, that you think the impact in general will be relatively low.
Yeah, most of the modules I think are going to be pretty small. If you think about it, Bluetooth modules, tiny. Yeah. Wi-Fi modules, tiny. Even GPS units, you can find them about this big.
Getting small,
kind of crazy. So in a lot of these, you'll probably see manufacturers building it into some of their like flight controllers, or building it into. I'm not going to talk for DJI, but I bet they're going to include it in like the air unit for FPV. It'd be easy way to implement it. So you'll see a lot of different solutions for implementation. Especially around modules and home builds and that stuff.
One other topic that came up on this podcast about the ruling was that the location of the pilots it is theoretically able to be seen by anybody that has access to that network. What can you talk to us a little bit about that and what you think maybe some of the reason is for that?
Yeah, remember, not on the network.
Sorry, with the broadcast. Yeah,
I'm very particular about the language. So
yeah, well, good.
No, you need to be. That's the thing.
Yeah. So with the standard remote ID drone, of course, that's going to be the ground station locations broadcast, and then on the module, it's a takeoff location. And as Vic mentioned on the other episode. It is a big concern, and I get it. I've heard stories about people having their drone shot at, people being sort of accosted. But when Vic and I talked to the FAA a couple of weeks ago, they're looking at some technical changes in terms of the definitions of crew member to specifically include sort of people, remote pilots, crew members associated with the remote pilot. So I think there's going to be that. We also have to realize that there are always going to be crazies. I mean, you encounter that on the road. You get road ragers all the time. So there's always a certain element of people who are always going to be jerks. But those who do stuff should be prosecuted. And hopefully that'll provide a disincentive to sort of interfere.
Set a tone. Yeah.
Yeah. And there needs to be high profile prosecutions to make sure the message gets out. So
I've seen, a couple constituencies are extremely concerned about their location, women being one of them.
Yeah.
It's, you got to strike a balance, right? So I guess, do you feel like there's a limit for how much information should be shared, even if at some point in the future we are able to share more information?
Technology eventually might take care of the problem. And also the societal acceptance will help take care of the problem. On the broadcast side, at least there is a technical issue about encryption, and especially encryption keys, and sort of making sure that the encryption keys the encryption key or decryption key gets out to law enforcement. So there's a huge logistical hurdle because you get those out to law enforcement or whatever, they have to keep it updated. If the law enforcement in general has it, guess what? It's probably going to end up in the public domain. So anybody's going to be able to see it anyways. It's not just a simple issue as a lot of people think. There's a lot of technical and also human factors that go into sort of why we can't encrypt and keep it away from people. And there's also network might be able to sort of hide it, but at the same time, there's there's costs and benefits to sort of both.
Right. Mm-hmm. So,
to be determined.
We're coming up on an hour. Any kind of final thoughts or any predictions for the new year? Anything to close us out here?
Yeah, a couple things. What I think the FAA did miss out on is if you look at the rule in the preamble was the discussion of notify and fly. And I think they missed the boat on that one, because I think that's a strong sort of way to be able to should be able to be a way to comply with the remote ID. And notify and fly is like the Lance. It's you get on an app, say, I'm going to be flying here at this time, whatever. And then send in it. Because guess what? If law enforcement needs to look it up, they can look it up. They'll figure out where you're flying and whatever. And there's accountability there. So I think there's improvements on that. And of course, as you mentioned, I think we got to figure out ways about sort of the pilot location and how to safeguard folks who fly. Right. And there's another thing too that to look at, and that's sort of like sheltered operations or protected operations, which are operations that occur below the level of any obstacles in the area. I think that might be a interesting idea to be able to create mini FRIAs in those zones and stay as long as you stay under certain altitudes. Right. So those are just some of the concepts to think about and just sort of to consider in the future.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us today. How can people just get in touch if they want to learn a little bit more, or how can they learn more about the Drone Service Providers Alliance?
Yeah, just stop by our website, www.dspalliance.org.
Yeah. We'll put it in the description too, so I can click over to that. But well, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you so much, Kenji, for being here. Apologies for the technical difficulties earlier.
No worries.
We'll get it better next time. And everybody have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.